By the way, I've discovered that I have a talent that is meaningless, but I do have the talent that is just
Did you do something with your hair? Sorry, Doug.
acting like I'm frozen, even when I'm not. I was like doing it with my friends. It's just like in the middle of a sentence, you just.
Doug and Anthony, before we start on, Doug, don't do that, man.
I'm so good at it. It's baseball night in New York, living room edition. It's brought to you by your Tri-State Cadillac dealers, Doug Williams alongside Andy Martino and Anthony Recker. Good to see you both as always. We're beginning this show with an interesting question. I'm curious where you guys are going to go with this, because you could use all 30 years. You could use the last 2 or 3 years. Totally up to you. But who is the biggest Mets nemesis over the course of the last 30 years? Andy, I'll begin with you.
Well, the time limit, the 30-year thing, prohibits me from being able to make an outside-the-box case for Mike Scott scuffing up the ball in the 86 playoffs. So that would be, not for the time limit, a direction I might go. But when you talk about the past 3 decades, I don't know what other direction to go but Jimmy Rollins. Just the fact that he taunted the Mets, in a sense, with his team to beat a prediction in 2007, backed it up with his play and the Phillies' play on the field, really came to dominate that division for a while after running his mouth and irritating New York. So Rollins not only trolled the team, but as I said, he backed it up with his play. And with little actions on the field, by the way. Here's a nugget for you. When David Wright used to stand at second base as base runner, Rollins used to always accuse him of stealing signs, and he would get into it a little bit. And Wright wasn't stealing signs, but Rollins would be the kind of guy to just be like, hey, try to block him so he couldn't see the catcher and stuff. It's always a little troll, but he was good at it.
I think part of your point, Andy, is that you're saying from my vantage point, it's obvious the direction to go in is Jimmy Rollins. Part of your point is most Mets fans at home think far and away of those Phillies teams, Utley is the villain. But you're saying through some reporting that you've done, it was really Rollins who was kind of the troll behind the scenes that maybe fans don't know about.
No, I think you got to look back. The Utley thing was only because it's a Hada. I mean, they slid hard into second base prior to that, and people didn't like him. But I'm talking about the media coverage even, and what was a big deal at the time back in that team to beat time in 2007. Rollins at that time was the bigger villain than Utley. The Utley thing was about an injury to a player. The Rollins thing was about big talk, which he backed up. So to me, it's not even my reporting. It's just like remembering how big a deal those team to beat comments were at the time.
For me, I'm actually going to go with Chase Utley. I think of the first things that popped in my head was Chipper Jones, Brian Howard, Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins. I mean, all these names just popped in my head right away. All a little bit more closer to that last 15, 20 years rather than 30 years. But Chase Utley, just the statistics he put up against the Mets are one thing, and they were incredible. Especially what he did at Citi Field specifically. You could go and look at Chipper stats too, and those were unbelievable as well. But obviously, you get into what happened with Ruben during the 15 playoffs. We don't know how that affected our team, the 15 team, the rest of the way. Maybe things would have been a little bit different. Obviously, I would like to discuss what happened the next year when, Syndergaard came out and threw. He thought Utley was holding the bat behind him, and he threw it, on the other side. He thought he was batting right-handed that time. So he threw behind him, but then Utley came back and hit 2 home runs, that at bat, and then the next at bat. I mean, it's just kind of, you look at all this stuff, and Utley was able to do, and he's gone on record flat out on TV and said, "Did you hate the Mets? Yes. Yes, I hated the Mets. I hated the franchise. I hated the fans. I hated everything about them." So this guy to me is the ultimate Mets nemesis.
And Andy, you mentioned, or Anthony, it might have been you, Chipper Jones going through your head. And I find it interesting that era isn't part of this conversation, whether it's Chipper or John Rocker. Why is why is Jimmy Rollins in a different category than those guys, Andy?
It's just all that team to beat thing. I just cannot overemphasize like how big a deal that was at the time. Anthony's making great points about Utley and what happened later, but Rollins to me was just a symbol of the beginning of that era where the Phillies overtook the Mets and the way he talked big. Rocker's an interesting one. He certainly wins for the most overtly racist opponent and anti-Queens opponent of that.
Overly crazy, I think probably would.
Perhaps even just crazy. But Rocker, I guess the reason he didn't spring to mind was because he's not important enough. And Chipper was
Yeah.
just likable, naming his kid Shea and embracing the New York thing. That to me, that takes him off like villain antagonist and makes him more of almost a quasi good guy in the eyes of like Mets land.
Isn't that almost antagonizing in itself, though? Saying,
Perhaps.
I dominated you so bad. I dominated you in that stadium specifically, especially early in his career, like that 96, the 2000, 2001 timeframe. I mean, it was amazing what that guy was able to do to the Mets in Shea Stadium. And then naming his kid, oh, yeah, by the way, I killed you so bad. I'm going to name my kid Shea, too, just to dig at you a little bit more. So every time I call his name, it makes me happy already. So look at that.
I obviously can't speak for both fan bases, but I do think there's a parallel between Chipper Jones and what Mets fans think of him and thought of him, and Pedro Martinez and what Yankees fans thought of him and think of him. There's almost a respect there because obviously we're talking about two Hall of Fame players. We're also talking about guys that killed your team, but after their career, during their career, there's always that acknowledgement of, okay, at least this is a great player. John Rocker didn't really have that. Didn't really have that
I would
at
say
all.
the insulting of all the ethnic groups that rode the 7 train kind of took away his ability to later become liked.
Fans hated him, but he wasn't a nemesis to the team necessarily.
Yeah.
All right, time now for out of left field. Speaking of Yankees and Mets, Anthony Recker, Citi Field or new Yankee Stadium? Which park you like better?
I like Citi Field better, and I think most people might say that. Surprisingly, you would think Yankee Stadium, but seeing as it's not the old one, I went to games at the old one. My debut was at the new one. I have a lot of fond memories actually at the new one, the new Yankee Stadium. But Citi Field, I mean, something about Yankee Stadium just screams. I mean, they both do a little bit, but screams a little bit too much corporate and too much. Doesn't feel like you're at a ball game all the time. Citi Field, I actually get a really good feeling there, and playing there, obviously, I loved it. I think it's a beautiful stadium. I mean, they built it, without really sparing any expenses. From a player's perspective, they're both really nice. Yankee Stadium might have a few more perks in it, than Citi Field does. But, I got to say, I really enjoyed playing at Citi Field a little bit more, probably.
Yeah, I agree with Anthony, and it's not particularly close for me. Citi Field is lovely. It's one of the nicest ballparks in the league to me. Being in there is a pleasurable experience. I'd rather take friends there than the new Yankee Stadium just because it's a nicer place to take in a game. The Yankees really blew it with the new stadium. It's very sterile. They're all corporate, but this one feels corporate. And it's just there's no ambiance there. It takes a really, really, really special game for that ballpark to have any kind of feel at all. I'm not a fan.
Well, I think it's so obvious that they tried to copy the old stadium and really bring that, but it didn't have the old feel that, maybe a Wrigley or, a Fenway or obviously old Yankee Stadium did. Sorry.
There's the nostalgia factor, obviously, with Shea, but I think every Met fan knows Citi Field is a much, much nicer ballpark, total different class of ballpark. When you're at the new Yankee Stadium, there's part of you that is like, did we really have to do this? I mean, because there are nice parts of that stadium. There are parts of that stadium that didn't exist at the old one, and the old one probably needed refurbishment. But I think part of you, when you're there, misses the old place and thinks of the old place and thinks they could have made that work. I don't think even the most Shea-loving Met fan thinks that in 2020 that ballpark would have held up.
Or you could go Andy's route and just completely trash Shea Stadium.
No, I think Andy's point made sense, though. It was, I think most Mets fans out there are thinking, okay, I understand that ballpark was the place that I went to my first game or where I watched the Mets win. But at the same time, I think every Met fan knows Citi Field's an entirely different experience. Andy, did you get a lot of vitriol for what you said, or did most fans understand?
None. You, Gelbs and Reck, you guys made faces like I was about to get run out of town, but I didn't get any negative feedback on that because everybody must know deep down that I'm right. And also, I was insulting in the process of praising Citi Field, so I think my base is with the Mets faithful on that one.
Or, Andy, it was just several of the 1,700 people you've muted on Twitter that were getting angry at you about
Always possible.
That's true. All right, guys, interesting stuff as always. If you're watching this on the web, you'll have to tune in to SNY at 7 o'clock to see the rest of the show. If you're watching this on television, we'll be back on the other side of the break. Little rapid fire coming up, so you have to stick around. Stay with us.